morning. It's great to be with you. If I don't know you personally, again, my name's Brian. And if you want to get to know me, let's see. Oh, when it comes to the Enneagram, I am a social 5 with a 4-wing. Or with the Myers-Briggs typology, INTP. It has this impressive sounding name, the Logician. That's who I am, the Logician. If there's any psychologists in the room, I know the big 5 of personality is kind of your bag. But my scores, I'm kind of embarrassed of, so if you have a practice, give me one of your cards later. We have some things to work through. Maybe there are some corporate types here. Strength finder top 5, right? Learner, intellection, input, ideation, relator. Now you know who I am. I wonder if you are a little bit like me. I mean, not that you have the same personality scores and all these kinds of typologies, but if you have used similar tools to try to understand yourself. If maybe you have been through similar experiences that have led you to use similar type tools. Now, for me, looking around this room, I'm one of the older people in here, so I have to go back way back in time to the early aughts, to when I first discovered some of these typologies. Some of you were quite young way back then. I was struggling. I had started a new organization, kind of like this one, and it wasn't going very well. We had almost no money, and certainly no one was impressed at that time with what we were doing. Some religious type people that I knew, their vision for me didn't correspond with how I felt about me. There was some tension there. At the same time, my wife and I were fairly newly married. We lived in a small place. We started to have babies. We had 4 of them. So there was all that stress. And at that time, we actually lived below the poverty level. I was struggling. I was probably dealing with some low-grade depression looking back. And what I thought I ought to do to pull myself out of that, to make work, to make relationships work, to make my faith work, would be to deep dive into me, to get me better. Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, Big 5, etc., etc. One of the things that I can promise you is I have read more books on these things than anyone in this room. I guarantee it. Have you ever felt similar? That you have this feeling that who you are in work is not exactly a fit. Or who you are in your true essence, in your family of origin, there's a little bit of a disconnect. Or maybe what you feel inside and what you've experienced in other religious communities in the past doesn't quite jive together. Experiencing some conflict between the inner real you and groups that you interact with. And maybe, again, you have a sense for work to work, for relationships to work, for you to work. You need to deep dive. Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, Strength Finder, Big 5, maybe even 6 working styles, whatever that form is for you. Well, we're continuing this morning with our teaching series, Open Hands, Receiving Through Releasing. And this is the time in the calendar when a lot of spiritual seekers go back to kind of remember the sufferings of Jesus of Nazareth. What was going on in his life as, again, fitting with the calendar, we kind of move up to his crucifixion and eventually his bodily resurrection. And historically, spiritual seekers during this time, not all year, but particularly during this time, say maybe there are some routines in my life, maybe there are some things that I do consistently that I'm going to intentionally let go of. I'm going to intentionally deprive myself of some of my normal ways of operating so that maybe the Spirit of my Creator will work in my life in a new way. And so with that in mind, this morning I'm going to talk about why, if not forever, at least for a little while, maybe you want to let go trying to understand yourself. Maybe you want to let go saying, well, I'm a 7, so. Well, I'm an ESTJ, maybe you want to let go of that. As Ryan said, I'm actually not going to talk that long today. We'll have plenty of time to interact. And so when I'm done, if you have a question, a comment, even more fun, if you want to tell me publicly how I don't get it, we will have a mic and we can interact together. So if you have those questions or comments, keep them in mind. All right, I'm going to read from St. Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, beginning in verse 14. He says, Christ's love compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all, and therefore all died. And he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we once regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here. So I just want to mention a couple of themes that we see from St. Paul in this brief passage. Again, verse 14, Christ's love compels us. And then he uses that phrase in verse 17, if anyone is in Christ. So Paul has this assumption that you and I would be better off if we intentionally oriented our lives around Jesus and his values. Now, I know not everyone here may agree with that. That's fine. But I think we should name this assumption that he's saying, if you want to live real life, the essence of it, orient yourself around Jesus. And then verse 15, he said, he, Christ, died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves. So here, some of us might think this is a little whacked out. He's saying the best thing that Jesus did is he literally chose to physically lay down his life. And Paul suggests that that way of thinking and acting might be good for us. To lay down our lives. A little trippy, but what he says. And then verse 16 again, from now on we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Verse 17, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has gone, the old has gone, the new is here. So Paul says if we orient ourselves after Jesus, if we kind of give up ourselves, if we take up the pattern where he laid down his life, we choose to do the same, it will change the way we see other people. We will see them in a new and better way. And we will even experience ourselves becoming a different kind of person. Now, I want to be clear. I think there are some benefits from the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or the Big Five of personality. Particularly if you're someone, maybe you're a little older like me, but if you're someone who's never taken anything like this, my guess is your family and friends would appreciate if you did. Because sometimes the best of what these typologies do is they give us a bit of a mirror to help us see how other people see us. Because we all think we are normal and everyone else is strange. when the reality is we are all our own version of strange. And so at best, sometimes you'll be like, oh, this is how other people see me. I remember when I first took them, I was like, oh, this is why my coworkers regularly get frustrated with me this way. Oh, this is why my wife says I don't get her, okay? So there can be some utility. And maybe if you're looking for a job, some of these common patterns can be used to help you figure out if you have the privilege of should I take this job or not that job. But I want to mention 3 reasons of why it's not always helpful to deep dive into you. And if nothing else, maybe the next several weeks, as we think of Jesus giving up his life, maybe you'll just kind of let go of this, at least for a little while. Okay, so number 1, you are too complex to fully understand yourself. And the more you try, you may become increasingly confused and possibly anxious. You are too complex to understand yourself. And the more you look in here, the deeper it's going to go. And the murkier it's going to get. There is someone that I love dearly who for a number of years has been racked by deep experiences of anxiety. Enough so that it has interfered with her life. She's had to drop out of school. She's had to drop out of certain activities. Used to do really well in theater. Backed out of all of that due to anxiety. Now, yes, she goes to a counselor. Yes, she has taken some medication. I will call her Amy. But I'll never forget a conversation I had with one of Amy's mentors. And she said to me, Brian, Amy is one of my favorite people. I love her. I think she is a great person and is one of the more talented people that I know. But she said, Brian, Amy might also be the most self-conscious person I know. And she's like, now I want to be clear. I'm not saying she's arrogant or conceited. It's like she is locked within herself, constantly thinking about what she thinks of herself or what other people think of her. And it's kind of eating away at her life. You know, the early Eastern Church fathers and mothers and others from the Christian past, like St. Thomas Aquinas, have this statement that we can kind of understand God's energies, but not God's essence. What this phrase means is if we pay attention and you stay open, you can notice God's energies. How does God tend to work in the world? But we can't understand God's essence. God is too big, we're too small. We can never get to the bottom of who our Creator is. But you know, they've also say the same thing about human beings. If we really pay attention, we might notice some patterns and how different people act, or maybe how we act, but we can never understand the essence of someone because we are immortal beings. And so whatever system, category, typology you use to try to get a handle on yourself, it is incomplete. It's always too small. You are always so much more than that. Okay, number 2. The natural you, your personality type, if you will, is not the real you. It is what you have been conditioned to become, and it is relatively temporary. Let me say that again. What you call your personality is not the real you. It is what you've been conditioned to be, and it does not go on forever. I think if I wanted to describe a typical American mindset or a typical American longing, it would be something like this. I want to understand the real me, the deep me, the authentic me. And I want to be free to be the real, deep, authentic me without anyone else putting a box around me, without anyone else trying to control me, without anyone else putting limits on the real, deep, authentic, unique me that is different from everyone else. Now, if there's a part of you that resonates with that, part of it resonates with me too. I get it. But is that the real you? Your personality, your gifts, your strengths? Now, forgive me, I'm going to nerd out here for a couple of minutes. Professor thing, okay? I'm going to nerd out, and these quotations are going to be a little abstract, but again, Professor, I'm going to have a handout later, and they will be on there, so if you want to read them some more. But listen to a few different people who are not me. Yuval Harari, not a Christian, atheist, Israeli, historian. He says, you have this fantasy that you just choose whatever you want freely. In reality, many of our choices, our desires, they are influenced by cultural factors, political campaigns of propaganda, by biological processes in our body. What is the real you? Something you've decided? Or does that come from your family of origin, the way you were raised? Or our culture? I mean, if you were born 200 years ago in Iran, do you think you'd be the same person you are now? You'd have the same personality? Or maybe even worse, some super rich, powerful corporate person has those algorithms that are sending you certain things, and you think, these are my opinions, my family thinks this way, but I think this way, but maybe you've been kind of manipulated that way? Who knows? Another quotation, Cynthia Bourgeois. Beginning in infancy, each of us, in response to perceived threats to our well-being, develops a false self, a set of protective behaviors driven at root by a sense of need and lack. What does she call your false self? What you call your personality. That's what she says, no, that's not the real you. That's the false you. One more, the Trappist monk Thomas Merton. My structure of pleasure and ambitions has no foundation. They are all destined by their very contingency to be destroyed. And when they are gone, there will be nothing left of me. The external self which we commonly identify with the first person singular. Okay, Merton's getting even heavier here. He's saying what most of us call me, my personality, this is my story, this is what I think. He's like, that dies with you when your body dies. It's temporary. It's not immortal. That will end with you. Okay, number 3. The greatest people who have ever lived did not live according to their authentic self. Instead, they sought to imitate the character of other great people and looked for ways to serve others. The greatest people who ever lived didn't live according to their authentic self. They sought to imitate other great souls and then look to serve other people. Who do you think is the greatest person or people that have ever lived? Mary, the mother of Jesus? Abraham Lincoln? Harriet Tubman? Maybe your grandma? I think both of my late grandmothers are some of the greatest people I've ever known personally. I am called to be more than my natural self. But I wonder if you are called to be more than that too. One more trippy quotation from Thomas Merton. He says, "The secret of my identity is hidden in the love and mercy of God. If I find him, I will find myself. God himself begins to live in me, not only as my creator, but as my other and true self." You see what Merton is saying? What you and I call our personality or our authentic way of being is our false self. But when we open our lives to the Spirit of our Creator and take on his ways, we become someone else, our true self, which is actually God within us. Again, 2 Corinthians 5, he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone, the new is here. Okay, let's take some time and interact together. Question, comment, disagreement. You think I don't understand something? Let's interact a little bit.
I'll come on so people can hear online. But a few ways to do this. Kelly, we have the Q&R slide. And one, you can ask a live question. Daniel's going to have a microphone that's going to be on. And he's going to walk up to you. And he's going to graciously hold it in front of your face without you taking it from him. And you can ask your question that way. The other way is to, when we get that Q&R slide up, you can text the word Midtown to 94000. And that will just put you in a queue where you can just type a question. I will get it here on the phone, and then I can ask it on your behalf. So text in questions or be bold, and Daniel's going to bring a mic to you. Andrew, you ready to go? Daniel, I got this one. I'll save you a walk.
What do you think is the allure of like personality profiles for ourselves and then especially for others? Like why is that, a thing we're doing?
Great question. I have a more simple, everyday response and then one a little deeper maybe. I think part of it is now we live in a global online world. Most people who've ever lived in a relatively small village. You knew relatively few people. And again, your station in life would either be handed to you or people would discern that and kind of come to you and say, this is what we think you ought to do. But now that we live online in a global world where it's like all cultures, all ideas, all perspectives, all nations are all combined, the question is, who am I? Traditionally, we formed our identity from our historical religion or our family. But the more we move away from our spiritual roots, or some of us, all my family lives on the East Coast, the more there's a question of who am I? And so I think that's part of the natural longing. Secondly, I do think part of human nature is, kind of going back to the garden in Genesis 3, is we like to think we can figure out ourselves and just, if I understand myself, I can figure out life, I know what to do, it will work, and I don't need all these other spiritual things, frankly.
Do you think that there is any value in our false self? Like, should it be something that we still incorporate into our true self, or should that be something to completely cast off?
Yeah, great question. So the spiritual writers would say part of what we do, and it is kind of a lifelong journey, is we learn to just let go of the false self. And we open ourselves to our Creator. We are being changed from the inside out, and now it is Christ in us. So one of the signs of spiritual maturation is people around you might be a little bit more of, I don't know how to categorize you. Because being this and not that, always thinking that way, never that way, always acting this way, not this way, is a sign that we're still kind of our limited natural biological self. When we grow into Jesus, we integrate in all sorts of ways. So we should desire to move away, but it's a lifelong process. And that's why I think there can be some utility, at least initially, to look at some of these tests, mainly to get a window in how others see us, and maybe again, if we have the option, to help us figure out what job to take. Because if you're in a lifelong process of Christ growing in you and not just being the natural biological you, you're still going to have some bad days, and it might be helpful if that pattern corresponds with your job. But to be who others want and need you to be, our thinking should not be, I am an Enneagram 5. I am an INTP. Our thinking should be, that's who I've been, but I'm becoming someone else.
I got a message one real quick, and then we'll come to that one. What does it look like practically to live out a life of learning from those before us and dedicating ourselves to service to others?
Good question. Practically, and we'll have a little bit of time in a reflection exercise here in a few minutes, but I would literally just sit down with some paper and be like, who are the greatest people either I've personally known or I've read about? What are they like? Why did I think they were great? What did they do? Okay, what does it look like for me to literally do what they do? Again, we don't think this way as modern people, even where we hear the phrase like believe in Jesus. What we tend to think that means is, in my head, I agree that like Jesus is the Son of God and he rose from the dead and I ask him to forgive me. That means believe in Jesus. Historically, to believe in Jesus means I think he's the model that I want to be like. And so I intentionally try to practice the kind of things that he did. And we can do the same thing with other bright lights from history. So that was the first part. What was the second part?
Yeah, and then how that just works out practically in service to others.
Okay. Practically in service to others would be what we tend to call spiritual practices, spiritual experiences, spiritual disciplines. Choose to step into those and then just be open for areas in your life where you can serve other people. I think one of the handouts that you will be leaving with today also has a little exercise for you to ask other people in your life, not someone who, not your mom who's like, you're amazing at everything, but ask other people based on what you know of me, how do you think I am best suited to serve other people? That's a great question to ask others.
All right, so Brian, I really like what you had to say, especially as far as your perspective on all the personality tests. It's kind of what I've been trying to tell everyone all these years. No one ever listens to me.
Wow,
So,
okay.
But, I think, yeah, exactly, right. So,
Do you want to come up here? Should I just give you the mic?
No. I'll let Daniel hold it. So, like, for someone like me I've read a little bit about the different Enneagrams and other tests and everything like that. I never did, like, a deep dive like you did. But I think, I guess the question is, like, is there anything I should take away from understanding personality types, especially when it comes to, you were kind of touching on a little bit about how it might serve yourself, knowing how you kind of are coded as a personality type. But as far as like understanding others and like knowing how I can like best interact with other people, by understanding their personality type. Do you see any value in that? And I'm speaking as someone who kind of dismisses it for the most part.
Yeah.
So just curious.
Okay. A couple of things. One, if by nature we tend to dismiss these things, it might be helpful to lean into them for a little while. Primarily to see our own blind spots. A simpler way of doing this, but one that's more painful, is again, you could ask 5 or 6 people that know you well that will tell it to you straight. Say, what do you think I'm good at? What do you appreciate about me? What do you not like about me? And my guess is they will all pretty much tell you the same thing. That could be maybe a quicker way of getting there, but it could be a little bit more painful. Yeah, and maybe having some basic categories to understand that there's common patterns that people live into that is different than I am. There could be some utility in that. Where I want to caution us, at least during this season of Lent, is thinking, if I want to grow, if I want to become all that I should be, I need to keep leaning into this, my personality type. When, again, it's very countercultural, but the way of Jesus and spiritual leaders says, no, you don't lean more into who you. Let me really offend some people. Jesus in his way says, in your natural self, you are not enough. You need to become a different kind of person.
Yeah, do that one, and then I'll wrap up with this one.
Yeah, Brian, I had somebody ask online, so I'm going to ask on their behalf here. How can we best love people who feel those Enneagram tests are life and hold on to them so tightly? Especially those who continue to want to place us in them.
I don't have anything super profound to say here, but just like how are we called to relate to anyone that we don't always think we're right, we're called to love them and be kind and love people.
I'm going to have Jordan Gabrielle. Is it a short one? Okay.
With the temptation to make these assessments into false idols as opposed to using them to point us to serving God more truthfully, is the differentiator more about intentionality?
That's good. I mean, great question. I think everything's about intentionality. So if I'm using anything to bolster my ego, to let me know that I am right and others are wrong, to let me know that I should be free to do as I want, whatever it is, that can be a personality typology, that could be my faith. It's a bad thing. If I'm using anything to say, I need to be more open-minded, I need to open myself more, I need to explore integrating new healthy ways of being into my life that are not natural for me. If that's a personality system or it's our faith, it's a good thing. So I think you're right. I think intentionality is everything.
Yeah, it's good. Really good questions, everybody. We're going to do one more. While we're doing this one, going to have to use a little bit of self-control. Jordan and Gabrielle are actually going to pass some papers with pens down the aisle. There's a number of verses or sayings on the top. Don't start reading them yet. Just let it sit on your lap while we finish this last question, and then Brian is going to invite us into an experience with those papers. So do everything you can to resist starting to read it, and then we'll get to it. But last question here came in through text. 2 really good ones. I'll go with the first one. Actually, I think that actually hits some of the intentionality there. Let's go with the third one. Jesus says that unless we become like little children, we will not enter the kingdom of heaven. How does this relate to giving up our false self?
Great. As someone who has 4 children and watched them, some of them fairly recently went through puberty. Puberty makes us self-conscious. We're now, hey, I kind of like that person. Do they like me? I'm interested in that person. Are they interested in me? Little children are not like that. And so I think what Jesus is saying here is something very similar. It really is learn to forget yourself. Try not to think about yourself. Give yourself over to more beautiful ways of life and serving other people and the best that we can. Again, it's a lifelong process. Let go of the constant focus of self. Transcend our ego. Okay, so you've been given a handout, and we're going to spend a little time in reflection, and there's two sides here, depending what you're interested in. One has two open-ended questions that are intended for you to kind of have some personal time, hopefully with your Creator, to explore a little bit about how you've been living, how you could be living, what it might look like for you to step in further into this. The other one, again, forgive me, Professor, has lots of quotations, including the ones I read earlier. And if you're just like, I don't know, I think Brian's wrong, I'm not buying this, maybe you could just take this time and read through those quotations. So our friends are going to play some music. I hope this will be a little bit of a prayerful time, but either respond to those questions or read through the quotations as kind of a personal response.